Hey everyone, welcome back to the React In-Depth series. In this video, we're going to go over another hook called the useRef hook. That's short for useReference. This is an oft misunderstood hook in React. I remember when I first learned React, I was really confused as to what this was for. I thought it was for a specific thing and nothing else. Hopefully this video kind of clarifies a bunch of misconceptions about this hook and really the main reasons as to why you would use it. This is going to be in direct contrast to the useState hook, which we looked at in a previous set of videos. So just keep that in the back of your mind, and I'll bring it up a few times throughout this video as we go through some examples. Let's take a look at the useRef hook together. Okay, so to start, just want to kind of start off with an overview. So the useRef hook is another hook that's built into React. And really the point of this hook is to store values or some kind of state you could think of, but independent of rendering. All right, so what I mean by that is that we don't need these values as part of our JSX markup. Right? And the reason that's important and the differentiating factor from useState is that the whole point of useState is that we need some state somewhere, and then that state is going to change from our setState functions, and then that's going to cause React to re-render our entire component so that value updates in the DOM in that JSX. But useRef, on the other hand, is a place where we can store values as state, but without that secondary re-rendering part. So that means that probably we don't need this value in the actual DOM or in the actual visuals that are showing in the JSX, but we need to store state somewhere as part of the component independently of that. So that's where the useRef hook comes in. Also, the useRef hook has kind of this neat feature in React where we can actually use it as a easy reference to certain DOM nodes. And if we want to get a bit more advanced, but we won't cover that really in this video since there's not that many reasons for this immediately, but the concept remains the same, is that we can also reference custom components with the useRef hook, very similar to how we'd reference regular DOM nodes. So we'll see an example of that really quick in this video. So to start, I just want to show you an example and some syntax as to what the useRef hook looks like. So on the left here, I have a useRef imported from React. I have a very simple component over here called reference, and this component uses the useRef hook like so, right here where I have highlighted. We can call the useRef hook, we provide an initial value, and then what that does is that stores that value in state for that component, but outside of rendering. So what we get back is we get back an object, and it has a current property that's pre-populated with the initial value that we actually give the useRef hook. So this current is kind of the convention that React uses, and we'll see how that's useful for us, but we can really use any key and value we want beyond this for other things as well. So over here, you can see that this component just returns a h1 with some hard-coded text inside. There is no state in this component when it comes to ideas of like useState. We're not like having a button change or like something re-render this component. This component is going to render one time, and it's going to get mounted. And then we're just going to have access to this state in our functions if we need to, and we can safely change this state. This is really the key, without having to re-render the component. In fact, that's kind of the point, because the entire point of useRef and this reference is so that we can change stuff and store stuff without the component re-rendering, because we would not use this reference inside the JSX down here, which is the whole point of useState. All right, so let me just kind of pull up Chrome, I guess also, and VS Code, just so we can see this example, and I can point out a couple of interesting features of this hook, and then we'll look at how we can use this as a reference to a DOM node as well. So I'm going to pull out VS Code over here. I have a folder open here. I'm just going to run npm create. I'm going to use vite at latest, and this is going to go out and start our React project. I'm going to call this use-ref. I'm going to use React, and I'm going to use JavaScript. So I'm going to change to my useRef folder. I'm going to run npm install. While that's installing, I'll open this up, and I'll open up my main.jsx and my app.jsx. And in my main.jsx, I'll just get rid of this CSS file here. We don't really need that. And then same with our app.jsx. I'm going to get rid of pretty much everything from here, including this useState. Actually, I'll keep that for now, and I'll just change it later. I'll keep get rid of this useState here. And in the markup, I'll actually make sure to return just an h1. And in there, I'll just say app. All right, so my npm install is done there. I'm going to run npm run dev. And that's going to start my dev server. I'm going to copy that URL, switch over to Chrome, and I'll paste that in just to make sure that that actually works. So there we go. We have app, and maybe I'll zoom in a little bit more even. And I have my console as well. Perfect. So the way that useRef works, I'll just close off my terminal here, is that we can import it. So I'm going to import useRef from React. Okay, this is just another hook that comes built into React, and we can use it. And there are several of these hooks. We can even create our own custom hooks, which we'll see in future videos as well. The way that we use this hook is we're going to get back a single object reference. I'll just call this ref for now. We can call it whatever we want, and we can call useRef and give it an initial value. For now, I'll say, for example, hello. All right, and I'm going to log out this. Ooh, that is not what I wanted. Console.log of ref. And what we'll see is we're going to get back an object that we can change, but that is unrelated to any of this JSX rendering down here. So I'll show you what I mean. So let me switch back to Chrome, and I'll go to my console here, and I'll refresh the page. I don't know what all these permission policies are. Interesting. I think that's probably from my extension or something. But we see that we have a object here that says current, and it has a value of hello. So it has a current property and a value of hello, and that's all that's in that object. And it's just a regular JavaScript object. As you can see right here, the prototype is just object. So that's pretty cool. So what is really the point of this? Well, if you think about this, what we can do is we can have this value change without actually having our component re-render. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to create a, let's do a function here. I'm going to call this handle click. And what this is going to do is we're going to take our ref, and we're going to take our current property, and we're going to, you know what, I'll change my ref to be 0 here just so we can see this in action. And we're going to add 1 to it. All right. And then I'm going to console.log out my ref again. All right. And to make this really work, what I'll do is I'll have a button here, and I'll say click me. And the on click will just refer to this handle click function. Okay. So what we're going to do is click this button, and we're going to see that this button is going to call this function, which is going to take the ref's current property, which we saw right here, right, was this value. And I'm going to change it to be a number now. And we're going to add 1 to it. So it's going to go from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, etc. And we're going to log out the entire object to see what's in there. All right. So let's switch over here. I'll refresh the page, and we see that we have current of 0. I'll clear my console here, and I'll click me again. Current 1, current 2, current 3, current 4. Now let me show you what's interesting about this, because you're probably looking at this and being like, okay, I don't really see the point of this. Why don't we just use state? So I'm going to pull in useEffect, and I'm going to make a useEffect here that's going to run on every single re-render, because there is no dependency array. All right. And in this useEffect, I'm going to console.log the ref. Okay. I'll even put ref changed. Okay. And we'll see if that comes out, or I'll just say, like, technically I should put ref change because that's not what we're going to see, but I'll just put that for now. And I'm going to switch back here, and I'll reload this component, and we see that runs the first time, which is what we expect actually, right? We expect ref change and then the object to be ran the first time, because this runs on mount, and all our hooks are going to run on mount. So that's fine. So now look what happens if I click the click me function. Click me, click me, click me. We're seeing the current property being logged out, and that's coming from this handle click function. But notice that the useEffect is not running, right? I'm going to repeat that one more time because it's so important, right? This useEffect is set up to run every single re-render of our app component. While I'm clicking this button, our ref is actually increasing the count correctly. As we can see, it's keeping track of state, but our component is not re-rendering. All right. And the reason is that we are using a reference, and this object is set up by React so that any changes to this object are not going to cause a re-render, because that's the purpose of a reference. If we want our component to re-render, we would use useState. And this kind of makes sense if you think about it, right? Because the entire point of this reference is to store stuff that we don't need down here. If we needed this reference down here, for example, let me show you if I put a p tag down here, and in this p tag, I'm going to put the ref.current property, all right, which is going to be 0 to start, and I come back in here and I reload the page. What we'll see is that it starts at 0, right? And if I click me, it doesn't go up in the DOM, right? In the DOM, it's not being updated, but the value is changing in memory. Right? So there's a disconnect here, and this is the disconnect that we saw previously that useState solves. It syncs what's in memory with what we actually see visually in the JSX and in the markup and in the DOM. But the entire point of useRef is to create as a reference that we can safely change without the effect of re-rendering the DOM, because the point of this hook is to that we don't need this value in the DOM for rendering. If we did need it like this, we would use useState instead. So you should not do this. You should not use a reference, a useRef reference in your markup, because it causes very confusing behavior for React. The reconciliation and the diffing algorithm might get confused, and it just breaks the idea of a pure function, because now we have something over here outside of kind of this component that's changing, and different calls to this component might be unstable. So once it might have one state, and then we change something over here that's invisible to this component, and we change it somewhere else, and then now another call to that component creates a totally different set of JSX, right? So that is not what we want. And you should not use references this way. If you do need to use it in the JSX, use useState instead. Only use ref as a reference to something that you need to store values outside of the JSX. So what would be an example of such a thing? Well, there's many different things, right? Maybe we need to store an interval ID or something that comes back maybe from an API, for example, that we don't always need in rendering, that is just a byproduct of something. Anytime we have something that we need to store in a component that we don't need it for rendering the JSX, that is when we use ref. There's one more use, which I'll show you in a second. But before I show you that, I want to just kind of point out this. Basically, theoretically, you can think of React doing this for us. We can basically say const ref equals this, and we're going to have a current property, and that's going to be, like in this case, 0. Okay, so we have a value that's an object outside of the component that React is creating for us automatically. It's going to create the current property and set the initial value to our initial value. And we can change this, and we can rerun our function without having this reset itself. Right? So this is being stored somewhere else in memory, like we saw with useState and useEffect, and we can safely change this value without React having to re-render our function. Okay, so there are some differences with that because we get some nice benefits from using it like this within React instead of just as a random variable outside the scope of the function. And I'll show you one example of such a thing right now. So if I switch to my slides here, one of the most common uses of useRef, and by no means is it the only use, is to use it as a DOM reference. So what do I mean by that? Let's look at this example here. So in this case, I have a ref. I'm setting it to null to start. That's a pretty common practice, just so that we know what it is when it's initialized. If I log that out right away, I get, as expected, an object back with a current property. That's the initial value, which in this case is null. So that's totally fine. Now, what's interesting here is if you look at the markup down here for the JSX, I'm returning an H1, and it has some static text inside of it. Now, the only difference here is that it has a ref attribute that is pointing to our actual reference object. Okay, that's this right here. This is a ref attribute. That's a special attribute in React that it uses to populate the ref reference with our DOM node. So what React is going to do is when it sees this, it's automatically going to take this entire DOM node, this h1, and it's going to set it to that ref.current property when it actually renders and mounts onto the DOM. So when we mount, which is right here after the mount and the JSX is done rendering, we're going to run this use effect. And if we log out that reference, then we will actually see that current is pointing to that h1. This is not the string h1, this is the actual DOM node, which is a live node to our h1 element in the DOM that we can actually change. So I just have some commentary here on that works, right? So this is a special prop where it's going to auto assign the current property of this in the DOM on render. And after the first render, ref.current is then going to populate because initially it's going to have the initial value. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if I create another ref, so I'll just call this const DOM ref equals useRef, and I'll just say this is null. What I can say here is I can take this h1, for example, I can put it on any DOM node that I want, and I can say ref is equal to, and then I'll put it to my DOM ref. So I'm saying, hey React, when you mount this into the DOM, please populate the current property on this DOM ref to be literally like document query selector of this DOM node. All right, so I'll show you kind of an imperative DOM API version of this in a second, but let's take a look at what this is. So I'm going to, where can I do this? Maybe I'll do it on mount, or I'll just do it in here. I'll say console.log of the DOM ref. And if I put the DOM ref out here as well, we'll see that DOM ref. We'll see that it starts off null and then it gets populated to that h1. So I'm going to refresh the page here and we'll see a whole bunch of logs here, but we see current starts as null for the DOM ref. I should have probably labeled that so it's easier to see. But then we see current actually points to this h1 DOM node. And check this out. If I highlight over this, I actually get the live node. Right? This is literally the h1 node. And if I open this, you can see that it really is that. It has all of the items in there that you would expect to be in that DOM node, like inner HTML, inner text, parent, child, all that kind of stuff is in there, right? Which is super awesome. So the way to really think about this is basically what's happening on mount. You can think of React doing something like this. So we can say like use effect, just theoretically, just so we understand what's happening here, is we're doing something like this. We're saying, hey, React, when you mount this component, I want you to set DOM_ref.current to be document.querySelector, in this case, the h1. And you can imagine that if we have many h1s on page, this gets a bit complicated. We need an ID and all that kind of stuff. So React takes care of all of that for us behind the scenes. It knows that this is the reference to this specific attribute for this specific node, and it's going to basically do this for us. So instead of having to do it this way, which is kind of the imperative DOM way to do it, we can do it through the React hooks way to do it, which is actually the advised way to do it and the correct way to do it in the context of using React. But you can think of it as just doing basically this behind the scenes, which is pretty cool. So what's really useful is that we can have as many as we need, and we can basically refer to a node pretty nicely. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. Why would we need this? Well, maybe we want to be able to scroll to components or focus components and many other things. And we'll take a look at a couple examples in the exercises as to why you would use this. But it is quite useful to be able to have access to a specific DOM node or a DOM tree within the current component so that you can do stuff with it or access it. All right. Just to kind of show you that this really does work, what I'll say is on mount, I'll say document DOMRef.current, and this is going to be the actual h1 tag, and I'll say .textContent is equal to I'll just say boo. All right, and take a look at that. Right, when I refresh the page for a split second, it's the normal content in there, and then it gets changed to boo. Now, don't really do this, right? If you notice yourself using the DOM API like this directly in React, there might be a better way to do it. Not always true, but sometimes you do need to reach out of React into the DOM API for things, especially like in a side effect like this. But there are other ways to do this. In this case, we would probably just bind this h1's text to be some state, and then we would change that way. That would be like the React way to do that. But just to show you that this is really a DOM reference and it works as you might expect. Now, you can store other things on this ref, right? Like for example, I can say like ref dot hello is equal to hello, and I can say ref dot animal is equal to monkey, right? And if I come in here and I reload the page, what we'll see is that those refs, that is part of that ref object. So this current property is just a convention used by React to help auto-populate things like with the DOM nodes and things like that. I would probably, you could do this. I actually don't really see a reason why you shouldn't do this, but generally what you'll see people do is just stick to using the current node, and they'll put maybe an object on there or an array on there and actually start putting things onto that object, just because that's like the React way to do things. So kind of to wrap up this video, what I want to show you is really to sum up everything that we just talked about. When do you need to use each of these hooks? So useRef is when we need state in our component, but without the re-renders. Okay, we want to be able to change that state and not re-render the component. Another way of thinking about this is that we need a place to store state that is not being used in the JSX. If you find that you're using that variable in the JSX, you probably need to rethink which hook you're using, probably useState or something else. We can also use it for DOM node references like we just saw. We can see it for other references like for intervals and observers and things like that. And we can even do custom component references, which is just an extra layer on top of what we just saw together, but really no different, than the concept is the exact same. So when you use useState, well, really it's quite simple, I guess. You only really need to use useState when you need to have that state change re-render the DOM so that people can see that update in the actual DOM UI visually. And if you think about it, that's kind of the point of React, right? Most of React is kind of this over here, where we are going to make some change that's going to cause some change in our code, and then we're going to see some new effect happen on our screen visually as a result of our click or a typing or whatever it happens to be. That said, there are times where we do need useRef though, where we don't actually need that to change something in the DOM. And that's why we have this hook. It's a safe place to actually store stuff for a component independently and actually not have it affect the re-rendering of the DOM. So we can go ahead and change ref.current to whatever we want and change that value. And we can safely know that we're not triggering the re-renders of the DOM unnecessarily. So hopefully that makes sense. I know that was a relatively short one, but this hook is not too bad once you actually see what it's used for, which we just saw together. What we'll do in the next video together is go through some examples just to get some practice with this to get a better handle on it. If you liked this video, I'd love it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, as well as have a Patreon set up if you want to support there, or on YouTube memberships and super thanks. So until we see each other in the exercise videos, I will see you later. Bye-bye.